Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I made a video earlier today, one of my normal ones reviewing supplements and studies showing that supplements don't work. And someone asked the question, hey Jason, why are you using only a single study when you say that it takes multiple studies, sometimes dozens of studies, to actually conclude that something is effective? You're taking one study and saying something doesn't work. Why are you doing that? It's a great question. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing. Work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. The reason for this is that because when you're doing science, what you're looking for to determine that something works is multiple studies. And that means all studies. So in other words, if you conduct 5 studies on something and you get 3 that show it work and 2 that it doesn't, that's not very good, okay? That's not good at all. In fact, that's really not enough to sell a product or claim that something works. That's bad. In fact, the only way that's viable is if you can explain and the scientists can prove that the studies that show that something works were better done and more accurate than the ones that show that they don't work. All right? And that's a problem. And so, yeah, I have done a single study on pre-workouts because there's only been one big study done on pre-workouts. You know what? It says they don't help you gain muscle or strength at all. They don't help you gain muscle or strength at all. And the study was extremely well done. It was so extremely well done that if anyone wanted to extrapolate the data, they could conclude that pre-workouts only serve a purpose for pushing people through workouts who have really bad training programs or whose diets are really insufficient. Because the study they did, they compared people and put them in 2 fairly good-sized groups to where they had a strength and conditioning coach write their training and a registered dietitian write their diets. So we could conclude that anyone who's getting a benefit from pre-workouts is either, number one, a placebo if they think it's giving them something. I mean, it gives them energy. It seems like it hypes you up. But if they're getting a gain from it or a benefit, it's because they have problems with their diet or their training. Neither one is well written. They're either malnourished in some way or they're training inappropriately. They're not recovering correctly from their training, and they need something to help them get through the bad workouts. But again, that could be addressed without buying a product. That could be addressed just by running a more effective program that's better written. And so because of that, you have one big study and it says pre-workouts are basically garbage, is what we can conclude from that study. Therefore, no one's going to pay for another one. All right, these studies are not cheap. I mean, you take a study like that, they had to get all these volunteers. They had to have people collect all the results. There was equipment involved, MRIs involved. Had to get a strength and conditioning coach hired. A registered dietitian had to be hired. Okay, that costs money. Why is anyone going to spend tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars for another study on something that the biggest one they've done just said, no, it doesn't do anything. It's worthless. And that was done on craze. So when we look at something like this leucine study, here's the problem. We now have one study right there showing, when we measure it, no benefit. That the leucine group versus the cornstarch group didn't gain any more muscle or any more strength. In fact, there was more muscle and strength in the cornstarch group, but it was statistically insignificant. So you've got a real problem here, and that's the way science works. No one wants to fund stuff further or study stuff further other than companies that have a financial interest in it. They maybe make that product. No one else wants to pay for studies or to study something further that shows it doesn't work. And if we were to treat the supplement industry like the drug industry works, did you know that a single study showing that a medication doesn't work is enough for the FDA to not allow it through, not to be allowed to be sold? All right, it can't be sold to cure a disease if they have one study. If you do 20 studies and you have one showing it doesn't work, that might be enough for the FDA to say your drug is garbage. That might be enough to keep you from being able to manufacture and sell that drug for a disease. Okay, that's how significant that is. It needs to be uniform. And when you have studies that show something doesn't have an effect, you have to explain it further. When you have something that does show an effect, you have to build larger and more complex studies to prove that it wasn't some other variable. You've got to have enough studies to do multivariate analysis to say that it was in fact this that had the benefit. Just like Greg Nuckols right now is doing a big personal review he's doing himself, looking at studies of different types of periodization. And one of the things he's noticed is that so far, the only studies, he found a trend that the more people that are in a study, the less likely the study is to actually show that daily undulating periodization has any benefits over linear periodization. Only really small studies show a benefit. Bigger studies with more people involved aren't, and some of the biggest studies are showing the other direction. They're showing linear periodization having a slight benefit. Okay, now that's not conclusive. He's still in the middle of that, but he just kind of showed a little chart he did the other day. So you guys see how that works? Just because you have a study showing a benefit doesn't mean that it's there. And here's the issue we get into with the leucine thing. Now that we have this study, if anyone wants to do further studies, the review board or the people who are going to fund it or whatever might cite this other study and say, what are you going to do different than this study? What are you going to do to show that this study was incorrect? Because that's how it works. Now that if something works, you should be able to identify it. Meaning if leucine helps you build muscle, if creatine helps you build muscle, if dianabol helps you build muscle, we should be able to do a fairly small study and show that the group who took it over the placebo gained more muscle or more strength. We need to be able to see it, even with a small study. If it actually works, we should hopefully see something, a little blip, something statistically significant. Because if you can't, even with a small group, it might not be worth studying in a bigger group. Now, and I said versus a placebo, and some people said, well, branched chain amino acids worked for me when I tried them. Well, that's also called placebo, guys. That's the reason they had to have a cornstarch group, because guess what? We've had studies where when people were given fake steroids versus a control group with no placebo, the people on the fake steroids gained more muscle and strength. They were just given a sugar pill. They were given a sugar pill and told it was anabolic steroids. They gained more muscle and more strength than the control group that wasn't given a sugar pill. All right? Let that sink in for a moment. So the fact that, well, I seem to notice a difference. Well, you know, if I had given you a sugar pill and told you it was full of Superdrol, you know what? There are studies on that showing that you'll get steroid-like side effects. Your aggression might go up. You might be more irritable. You might even get some acne, and your strength will probably go up. You'll probably have slightly better results in the gym. If I lied and told you that there was the anabolic in there, a really strong anabolic, and you believed it, even if it was just a sugar pill, you will actually make slightly more gains. All right, we have studies showing that. You guys see the problem there? Well, I tried it. Well, it's called placebo. That's why when we do studies like this, and I say we, I mean the human race. I don't mean me personally. I'm not conducting any studies right now other than involving gunpowder and bullets and stuff like that. That's the only studies I'm doing. So the point is that's why we have to have the placebo, because the people believe they're taking something that works. They'll sometimes get a benefit. So what we're looking to see is it give anything more than the placebo group does against the cornstarch or the sugar pill? And in this case, no. Now, the only way you're going to be able to come back from that and say that leucine now works is if a bigger study is done. You're going to have to bring up a couple points. Well, number one, the study wasn't big enough to get an accurate measurement. Yeah, we should have seen something, but leucine isn't that powerful. So we're not going to see anything significant unless we get enough people to really analyze it better. 10 people in each group just isn't enough. We need a bigger study. That would be how you would reconcile it and say, and these people maybe weren't pushed hard enough. We need a higher frequency training program where maybe we have them squat 3 or 4 days a week. Increase their weekly tonnage, their weekly volume, and their frequency, because the leucine will probably help with the recovery end. And if we have them training harder and training more often, and we get more people, say 25 people in each group instead of 10, we might see some benefit from the leucine group. That they weren't training hard enough, and the benefit is so small that we just couldn't identify it with that small of a group. Okay, that's the only defense you now have. Like, if you can't come back with something like that and then fund a bigger study, you're done. You're dead in the water. From a scientific perspective, leucine is done. You're going to have a study that's bigger in scale and explains, and to even get funding, other than maybe Civation or some company that's selling leucine, the only people who are going to fund anything further. No, you're not going to get grants for it. Okay, you're not going to get grants for something that's just been shown. It doesn't work to get a bigger study unless you've got a really, really good way you can spin it that they didn't train hard enough and we need a bigger group. So you're going to have an even more extensive, larger study now, and you're going to have to do something where you change a variable such as how hard they train. Then all you're going to be able to show is that, well, leucine might have a slight benefit for people who are pushing the absolute limits of their training. not people who are just training reasonably hard. See how that works, and that's the problem. We now have a study showing no benefit. When you're dealing with science to prove that something works, trying to provide evidence, because you're never going to fully prove it, it's just how much supporting evidence do you have. That's a massive blow against it, and it might be a big enough blow against it that it's going to be hard for future sports nutritionists to get grant money to study something, because they're like, it doesn't work, we've already got this here. You want to do a bigger study? What's your explanation? Why do you think a bigger study is going to work? Because that's often what happens too, is that sometimes you see that some things do come out when you have a larger study. All right, but when we say that something works, you need to have enough studies to do multivariate analysis. You don't just say creatine works or leucine works or anything like that unless you have multiple big studies in which multivariate analysis can be done to figure out if it really worked, or if there was some placebo or some training difference, or it only works for people over the age of 27. Like it only works for people between the ages of 27 and 31, but no one else. And as crazy as that sounds, that's the way studies have to look at things. You've got to be able to look at it and figure out why a study, one works and one doesn't. Because the second you have one that shows no benefit, you have to be able to explain why that study shows no benefit when you compare it to another study that shows it works. Otherwise, you're dead in the water. Because people could also just throw back and say, well, there was something flawed in your study that shows it works. Because we now have one that says it doesn't. And again, when you're talking about selling products, the supplement industry is like the only industry just about that you put stuff into your body and you can legally get away with this. When you have a study that shows no benefit, if it's a drug, anything the FDA regulates, they're not going to let you sell it. They're not going to let you make the claim as soon as you have a single study showing no benefit. You're done. That's what's just happened with CBD oil on something. And this is stuff I look at because I have friends who are really big into legalizing cannabis. And I believe in legalizing cannabis. I don't think it should be, or at least decriminalizing. I don't mean it should be completely unrestricted, that every 8-year-old could walk to the store and buy a pound of weed. It should be treated probably similarly to alcohol. But I also don't believe in everyone jumping up on, oh, it cures all these things. It doesn't. The data's not there. Because in fact, I had a friend who linked one and said, look, this article says it helps with epilepsy. Well, I went and read the actual study, and the study didn't conclude that. There were 10 people with epilepsy. They were given CBD oil. 5 of them showed no change in their symptoms. 3 of them showed an improvement in their symptoms, and 2 of them showed a worsening of their symptoms. That's completely random, because if a substance actually helped improve a medical condition, you wouldn't see almost as many people get worse as those who see an improvement. And the total from even that small study done, the people who saw any change were only half. Half of people saw nothing. You know what? That's as random as if people weren't given anything and their epilepsy will get better and worse on its own. Some people are going to get better. Sometimes they're going to get worse than others. So it's just as random. That's just as random as if they weren't given anything. And therefore, off that single study, a reasonable person is going to conclude that CBD oil doesn't help with epilepsy and seizures. Okay, that's what they're going to conclude. And when that study showed that, it's going to be very difficult for anyone to get further funding, because a study like that will leave you dead in the water. You're done. No one wants to fund garbage that doesn't work, particularly for medical issues. Seems like supplement industry is the only place they're willing to do it. So yeah, when you're looking at showing that something doesn't have an effect, a single study is sometimes enough to completely bury it. And it's enough to create a big block in the wall that says, well, you're going to have to come up with 3 times as much evidence now to show that it works, now that we have something showing no effect. You're going to have a lot more evidence now. That actually hurts your efforts tremendously off of a single study. Just like now with the CRAZE study, there will probably never be another expensive study done on pre-workouts. You got a big enough one done that it's considered a waste of money now. It's not going to get researched further. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.